Let's, Adam, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me, Sam.
All right, so last week we had Josh Holland on, who was arguing that Medicare for All as a litmus test is problematic for I guess the maybe perhaps political reasons, but I think more because his argument was that Medicare for All is not a panacea and not necessarily possible. And so I wanted to start with with what would ultimately be, I guess the alternatives. And one piece that you wrote in the Jacobin is the case against the public option. Tell us, I mean, what as we look at alternatives to something like Medicare for All, which would be a single payer system, what is problematic with the other options?
Well, I think we need to begin by identifying the primary problems with the U.S. healthcare system in order to even be able to assess whether these other solutions would solve those issues. So, some of the biggest issues include uninsurance. 28 million people under Obamacare remain uninsured, underinsurance, rising numbers of workers with high deductibles, co-payments, co-insurance, things that squeeze their wallet every time they actually access healthcare, rising drug costs. I mean, just to give one figure, the Kaiser Family Foundation employer benefits survey found that deductibles for workers have risen by 300% over the last decade. So uninsurance and underinsurance remain primary problems in the U.S. healthcare system. And the reason why I disagree with Josh Holland's argument, and the reason why I very firmly continue to believe that Medicare for All is the answer, is that it is the only policy proposal that would actually truly eliminate both uninsurance and underinsurance. The public option would not do that.
And all right, so I mean, let's walk us through why the public option won't. I mean, because we heard a lot about it during the Obamacare fight, and it was initially a large part of both Clinton and Obama and Edwards' proposal back in '08, I guess it was. And it ultimately died in the Senate in the hands of not just Joe Lieberman, but I think it was Conrad and Blanche Lincoln and maybe Baucus and Ben Nelson. At least those four or five were responsible for knocking it out of the box, as far as I can recall. But give us a sense of what it was meant to do and why it doesn't deal with the issues of either one of those, the uninsured or the underinsured.
Well, let's identify what people mean when they talk about a public option right now. The current iteration of the public option that people are speaking about is a public insurance plan that is sold on the Obamacare marketplaces, okay, that would compete against other private health insurance plans. And the idea being that it would keep the private insurers honest, that it would provide another option, that it would provide lower premiums. I would point out that the Congressional Budget Office has actually scored the public option back in 2013, that version of the public option. They found that it would not have any significant effect on overall number of the uninsured. They found that it would reduce premiums somewhat because it was paying providers at a lower rate, but otherwise it would not lower uninsurance. Because don't forget, people who buy their insurance plans through the marketplaces are a relatively small minority of the country. And the public option, because it's an option, would not apply to all the people who are uninsured. So there's no evidence to suggest that the current versions of the public option would reduce that 28 million number of uninsured at all, much less to zero. Medicare for All would reduce it to zero.
So when we talk about those 28 million, who are they? I mean, what percentage of those people are in Republican-controlled states that do not expand Medicaid? And then who are the rest?
Great question. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I can tell you it is a mix. Some a minority of them are people who are not getting Medicaid, even though they should be, because they are in Republican-controlled states, as you say. And expanding Medicaid to all 50 states should remain an important objective of the left and the progressives, and I'm completely on board with that. Some of them are undocumented immigrants. Some of them are people who simply do not feel that the Obamacare plans available to them are affordable. So it's a mix of people. Overall, they're more likely to be low income. Overall, they're more likely to be Black and Hispanic than they are white.
Okay, and so let's talk about, I mean, how we would, let's go through the different options, I guess. I mean, where we are now. I mean, presuming for the time being, and I think that this is, I'm not 100% frankly confident that that Trump care is really truly dead. To be honest with you, I mean,
I hope so. I hope you're wrong, but we'll see.
I hope so too. I mean, but you know, there's a lot of things that can happen between now and 2018. Not the least of which is, you know, Robert Menendez, who's going on trial in a month and a half, and you know, that seat will go to a Republican if he vacates it before 2018. And
that's a fair point.
And there's your 51st vote. So I mean, that's, you know, that's just one scenario. But for the sake of this conversation, let's assume that Trump care is done. What are the various options that you hear are being floated about?
On the left, I think there's really two main paths. One is Medicare for all, which is achieving unprecedented amount of support within the Democratic Party. A majority of House Democrats have signed on to the bill that's currently there. And the other side, I think, is what more or less what Paul Krugman advocated earlier this week in the New York Times, which is to keep the ACA as it is, bolster it somewhat, add a public option. Those are the two real things you're talking about. Josh Holland sort of talks about a more robust sort of version of a public option than does Krugman. But those are the two main approaches, a sort of incremental building on the ACA versus a more fundamental reform and the creation of a national health insurance program like many other nations.
And so, all right, so walk us through, like, how would this take place? I mean, I guess the concern that that Josh Holland expressed in the piece was sort of a combination of policy and political, in that there would be an over-promising and an inability to actually get there. But give us a sense of how you perceive it happening.
Well, I mean, I think it's important just to point out one thing about Josh Holland's piece. I mean, one of the things he says is that, giving people Medicare in place of their current plans is going to make people unhappy. He writes that, all these people who are currently insured through their employers may not be so keen on being switched into Medicare when Medicare may have actually less benefits. And that would be a real problem if it were true. But we're not talking about Medicare for all. We're talking about, to use the title of John Conyers' bill, expanded and improved Medicare for all. We're talking about Medicare without the co-payments, with other deductibles, and with wider cost sharing. So I think one of the big arguments here of loss aversion that he makes is really not grounded on a good evidence. I mean, he's aware of John Conyers' bill and what it would do, but he doesn't really incorporate that into his analysis. In terms of how this would sort of be implemented, I think is your question, how we would go about actually creating Medicare for all. I mean, I think you can look at the passage of Medicare itself as sort of a historical example. We can talk about what the best transitional approach is, and that's a debate that's worth having. But that's a separate debate from what our end goal should be and whether we should pass legislation creating a new public universal health system. And I think that debate has mostly been won by progressives already.
Hi, folks. Sam Seder here. We still need your help on our Patreon page. YouTube ads have come back, but not nearly as much as we had before. So if you can help us out, any little bit helps. Head over to our Patreon page right at this URL, and you'll help us keep helping you by making videos